So, first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'd like to acknowledge within the territory of the Sechelt Nation. I'd like to call this Special Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, August 31st to order at, what time are we at? 9:38. And we actually have an amended agenda in front of us. Some additional material was added this morning. This is the budgets for the various libraries and reading rooms. We also were handed out this document that was emailed to us, so you all have that. So what I'd like to do first is move adoption of the amended agenda as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And then let's receive all the reports, including the handout that we got this morning. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. All right. Is anybody speaking to this, or are we just going to go for it? We're just going to go for it. Okay. So there are a number of things on the agenda as I see it, and what I'd like to do is look to the board to see if I've captured what we need to discuss or if there are other items that you want to bring forward. So we have to talk about reading rooms. One of the questions that came up about reading rooms is organizational status. Are they incorporated, nonprofits, or others? Is there information about the status of the buildings, and does work need to be done, and if so, is there budget available for that? The Gibsons Public Library, are there any significant repairs that are required down the road, and have we incorporated those? I have the Sechelt Public Library, what the status will be if we're looking at a service as a municipal library or if we're looking at a memorandum of understanding. And then what type of funding model we want to look at, so what the basis is for the funding across the board. And then another conversation that came out was capital reserves. There has been conversation that capital reserves cannot be set for each of the libraries. That would be at the regional district level. In reading, and I'll look to staff for clarification on this, in the bylaws that have been set up on funding the library, it does not say in there that the funding cannot be used for capital at the local level. So they can set up their own capital reserves internally. It cannot be set up as a reserve at the regional district. So I'd look to staff for clarification on that. Tina?
As far as the regional district library service establishment bylaws, it depicts funding the library associations. The Half Moon Bay Library Service does depict something about operations, so it's a little more explicit as to what type of funding. However, capital has been funded, minor capital, so things like iPads or equipment, those types of things for the Sechelt Library. For the reading rooms, for instance, there hasn't been any capital that I have any recollection of, because those are usually leased building either through community associations or, in the case of the Pen Harbor Reading Room, the Rangers Station, which is actually a regional district facility. And in the case of the Gibsons Library, that one there is a function of the regional district, so it does have a capital reserve, and the regional district operates that building. The land is leased from the town of Gibsons, etc. So that's a completely different arrangement, because that's part of our facility management side of things.
Thank you. Anything else that the board would like to add to the agenda? So I captured it? Okay, cool. And what would you like? Oh, and then the other piece that we've got is, this is the amount that each of the areas can fund. If you look at that, the line on there, I think we're looking at as limit by law as the maximum. And I think the one we're going to run into issues with is Area A. So if you look at Area A, the limit on taxation is the greater of 4 cents per 100,000 or per 1,000 or $67,000 max. Sorry? Yeah, okay. And then the budget. Okay, so let's go through the report first, see if anybody has any questions in the report that was presented to us. Get those clarified, and then we'll head into discussion. Oh, and this is hot. Okay, any questions or comments on the report itself? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, on page 3, the per capita parity. Do we have the figures of this? Like it says I'm just, is there figures to what is this per capita parity that we're trying to move to?
Staff?
The per capita parity was explored as part of the original Seashell Library, so those values have changed over the years. I do believe that there has been various presentations. Staff hasn't done a review or analysis of that recently, but really depends how you measure it as well.
Director Hiltz?
The yeah, that's the question. How do you measure that? That's what. There's a sentence there. I'm just wondering if there's a clear definition on measuring that metric.
I believe the best metric would be from the Ministry of Education and how they're funded per capita through the province. I think you'd want to keep those consistent, so apples to apples.
Thank you. I had a question on page 3 as well, just for clarification. Right at the top, it says, in the case of Sunshine Coast Electoral Area A, only a portion of the electoral area is considered as served. Egmont and Pender Harbour are considered as served communities, while the remainder population in the area is considered unserved. That's a provincial guideline. Is that still in place? Do we know at this point?
Yes.
Thank you. So that will impact the population that is used there. Any other questions on any of the other pages in this report? Director Lee?
The served area numbers were provided by the regional district at some point, according to a document I found. But I don't know who, how, why, or when that was done. Do we have any information on that?
Staff?
I have some information, but I would want to research a little bit further to see the history on that.
Follow up?
Just a little clarification specifically, because if you look at the numbers, it says Area A is 1,500 permanent. I've got the figure somewhere, but it's high. It's about half, just a little over half of the permanent population in the area. And it's based on a line they have drawn somewhere and the people inside that line. So I was kind of curious how that was done. And at the same time, West Howe Sound, I believe it was, had 3 areas, one of them excluded, and then it was changed. I can find that out. Just give me a sec. I'll ask the question.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, go ahead.
We're still talking about the report?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'll ask them all then. Pender Harbour Reading Centre was denied an extra request for operational items in 2015 of $1,500. Any reason, any idea why that happened? Do you know? Would you like me to repeat that, Chair? Okay. In the report on page 1, it says that Pender Harbour Reading Centre was historically requested special funding through Rural Areas Grant in Aid, and it lists the ones they received in Grant in Aid. And it happened in 2016, 2014, 2013, 2012. But there is a line that said it was there was one that wasn't granted in 2015, and it was for $1,500. And I was wondering if there was a process reason for that, hence my question.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that one. I don't know if there's more information on that.
Okay, staff?
So one of the things was when we created the service in Area A, the funding for the reading room used to be through the Area A grant and aid function. And so when we created the service, we transferred it into a feasibility study, and then we moved it into the new service establishment. So I think they did receive that grant because it was what they received for many years, and then when they established the service, it went up to $2,000. So I think it's not that they were denied, it was that it moved columns in. So I don't think they were denied.
So grant and aid is still a realistic option if it should happen? No? Okay.
No, the reading room and the library are now both funded through the function. Further questions?
This is just confirmation that I have it right.
Are you looking at a particular page?
I'm looking at page 2 now. And it says the libraries and reading rooms are funded by local government based on budget submissions each year from stakeholders. And it says that the Reading Center, Printer Harbor Reading Center, is wholly funded through Function 643. I'm just confirming that that function has got a limit on it as set by bylaw number 1086. In other words, it's part of the 60,000, 64,000.
67,000, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Other questions, comments? Okay, I'd like to look at page 27. So this is the agreement between the Sunshine Coast Regional District and the Gibsons and District Public Library Association with regards to Roberts Creek. If you look at page 28, under number 5, it indicates the breakdown of funding for the reading center, the library, and both libraries, right? So it says 7% or $5,000 for the reading room, and then 50% of the remainder. However, if you go to the next page, page 29, this agreement actually expired at the end of 2008. So while that has been practice, it's no longer required to be followed. The same with the next one with regards to the Seashelt Library and Roberts Creek, expired in 2008. The understanding, I believe, is that these were superseded then by the MOU. Staff?
Yeah, and in the case of the Gibsons and Area Library Association, we have one agreement between the SCRD and the Library Association for both Seashelt and for Gibsons. And so, yes, that agreement is superseded because the SCRD is an entity. The area is not a legal entity.
Okay, any questions by the board on that? Okay, so let's look at page 34. I think the first conversation we should probably engage in is regarding whether the Seashell Public Library should be a service, a municipal function, or if we're looking at an MOU. Yes, Director McMahon.
Well, I was interested in knowing what the long-term plans are, because it is currently, both libraries are currently public library associations. One has the funding bylaw, the other doesn't. If they intend to remain PLAs in the long term, then it makes sense to establish the funding bylaw. However, the rumor mill says that Seashelt is interested in becoming a municipal library, which is an entirely different legal situation, and in which case establishing a funding bylaw would be a waste of our time at this point. So I just wanted to figure out what the long-term plans are.
Is that a question that Seashell Library can answer?
We did look at the funding implications from the province for being a municipal library and being an association, and we found that municipal libraries and associations are funded the same from the province, the same rate per province, so it does not make a difference in the funding we receive, regardless of the governance model.
So that looks like it might come back here. Director McMahon.
Well, it is a governance question, so I would boot it back to the library board because at the moment, public library associations are governed by their members. That's how the bylaws work. You elect the library board. Municipal libraries are governed by a board appointed by the municipality, so it's quite different. And if a library intends to change its governance structure, I would think that the members should have something to say about it through the board. So, yeah.
Did you want to speak to that?
I guess simply to take your point, but to say there's two issues there. So there would be the decision made by the library board, but we cannot decide ourselves that we are going to be a municipal library without agreement from a municipality. So that's where that conversation would come in.
Go ahead.
Well, just to nitpick, actually you can. What happens is if the entire library board resigns, then the library becomes the responsibility of the municipality, whether the municipality likes it or not. So,
I don't know that that's the choice we would make.
Yes, go ahead.
historically, it has been threatened in the past.
Oh, wow.
I understand.
Yes. I'll say informally, because this has not come up at a council meeting, but informally, the councillors have expressed that they would consider a memorandum of understanding, as so long as whatever the determination of funding is fair across the board, so that there's some kind of funding basis that we can use to justify it to the residents. That's it. Any other comments or questions about the report? Okay, so let's look at this handout first, just so everybody's familiar with the numbers. So Gibsons and Area Library, this is for areas E, F, and Gibsons. So at the bottom, it shows the limit by law. Is that the number we're looking at? The limit that the three of them together can fund the library. Over to Tina.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, yes, on this particular page, it does show the limit by law. However, the uniqueness with the Gibsons and Area service is that, as you can see, we requisition $700,000, but that is decreased by the fact that Area D contributes a portion towards that. So that just decreases the amount requisitioned by those three participants.
So the amount requisitioned by these three participants is $700,000, but that's not the total budget that goes to the library, is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. The next page is, this is the one for Area A. And even though if you look at the limit by law, it says $80,826. If you look at the top, the third line, it says the greater of 0.04 per thousand or $67,000. So it's not actually the 80,826. Correct. Next one is Half Moon Bay, showing 320,757, and then Roberts Creek, 355,481, and that includes the reading room. Actually, Area A also includes the reading room in that 67,000 max. Roberts Creek would be reading room plus the 2 libraries. Director McMahon.
Just to be clear, on the Roberts Creek one, so that requisition is both libraries and the reading room?
Yes. Okay, should we take some of the lot smaller items first, the reading rooms? Organizational status of the reading rooms. Do we know what the organizational status is? Director McMahon?
In terms of long-term planning, those were questions that arose. It may exceed the boundaries of our discussion today, but it would be interesting to establish a long-term strategy.
Director Ties.
I know that the Roberts Creek Reading Room building is owned by the Roberts Creek Community Association, and that the library pays rent there. So that's the arrangement, I believe, that's going on right now. As to the upkeep, I guess we'd have to liaise with the Roberts Creek Community Association, but as far as I know, things are in decent shape there.
And the reading room, what is the status of what's their organizational structure? Are they a nonprofit? Are they?
I believe they're nonprofit. They're volunteer run, so yeah. We'd have to check in on that.
Okay. And Area A, do you know what their organizational status is?
Yeah, they're a nonprofit run by volunteers. And the building's SCRD owned and maintained.
The other question was around the Gibsons Public Library. Are there significant repairs down the road? Is that an issue that we need to get into, or is that taken care of inside of the budgeting process normally, given that we own the building?
So several years ago, it was contemplated as to whether or not we wanted to expand that particular facility when they actually were doing their reconfiguration project. And out of that particular project, we did a building condition assessment. And in that, as you recall, last year we completed the HVAC replacement. So there has been a series of improvements for that facility that was constructed originally in 1996. So there was a lot of deferred maintenance. We've caught up on that, and I think we're in a good state of affairs. So there's nothing large from a regional district building maintenance side on the near future. But we continue to save reserves, et cetera, for that. So we're in good shape.
Thank you. So then we should probably get into the conversation around funding basis. We've had a number of items thrown out. We've had, we talked about per capita, based on assessment, 50-50, and then Director Ties also sent out something a little different. Would you like to address that?
Yes. So I've got a little bit of a speech here. First of all, before I introduce this funding model, I want to first of all say that I believe that libraries and a well-funded public education system are essential components of a functioning democracy. So as soon as access to education and information is only possible for the privileged, we have a two-class society, and we can see where that leads by looking at our neighbors to the south. So I just wanted to say that out front, and just to reiterate that I think we should all pay into libraries, whether we use them or not. And the next thing is that I will be suggesting a funding model for the Seashell Library that takes population, the commercial tax base, and the number of people that are served into account. What it does not take into account is cultural considerations, like the fact that First Nations may have a different attitude about libraries, considering their history is oral. And I'm also woefully ignorant how taxation works in the SIGD. So my calculations while trying to get everyone on a level playing field may not work for everyone. On the other hand, there is a growing number of businesses in the Seashell Indian Government District, and I believe they should contribute to our libraries. And if the proposed solution offends in any way, I sincerely apologize, and my intention is to discuss this matter in an open forum that includes everyone's considerations. Now, the member from the SIGD is not here, so I feel very uncomfortable tabling my proposal without some comment of the Seashell First Nation as to this funding model. But I'm not sure as to how to proceed at this point.
Okay, so does everybody have that spreadsheet? Yes? Any comments, questions? This is where, one of the things that I noticed right away is the Area A would not be able to fund this based on the current taxation bylaw.
Give me a sec. I run it using the right figures, but I can't find it right now. Darn. The spreadsheet should have had the adjusted figures for served areas rather than the total population if you were to use that approach.
Sorry, I was distracted. Do you say that again?
I need to find the spreadsheet, so I'll look it up on my computer here. But the entries that Andreas made used the total population of Pender rather than the served area population.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Tina.
So the figures are a little different, but I'll just have to find that. I had a printed copy, but I'll look it up on my computer. I'll be right back.
Okay. So, Director Toth, you had a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that on the SCRD bylaw 1086, it actually says the greater of 4 cents per 100,000 or $67,000. So I read that as the minimum is $67,000.
Tina?
I think it's the less than. It's maybe the way it's worded, but it is the cap. That was the intent of it, is to cap it at a certain dollar amount. We've done that with other bylaws as well.
Okay. Yeah, Director Ties?
So I'm wondering if maybe staff can put up the Excel spreadsheet up on the screen so that the audience can see what we're talking about, and then maybe I can give a little introduction to the spreadsheet with my rationale behind the calculations.
Yes?
Yeah, we just have to change profiles here,
Okay.
and we
No
can
problem.
get that up for you.
Yep.
you can, if there's something else you want to move on to.
Does anybody need a break? We've been in here since 9 o'clock. No? Yes? Director Lee?
I have found my spreadsheet.
Okay.
If we were to go with population in served areas, it would be 63034. Well,
60.
approximately.
Sorry, what number are you referring to? That's 630.
I used 50% rather than, because I didn't know how the 1,500 was made, and it's
Okay.
above 50. 1,300 is 50% of the Area A population.
Okay.
And so I used the 50% served.
And that's 1,500 people? Or
That would become 60, let's say 63,000 for the want of a better
right. How
term.
many people, though? Because this is based on population.
Well, 2624 divided by 2, 1312.
Okay. So you're saying 50%.
But it's actually 15-something from the BC government.
Okay. Okay.
I have to say that I'm actually not in favor of doing it this way.
Okay.
And if I may, I'll explain why.
Sure.
My thought. The original MOU was the last one that just expired, was based on the number of cards issued in Area A or the number of visits to the library by residents of Area A. And these figures were presented by the library in 2015 and 2012. And so they used between 4.4 and 5% for Area A's contribution. And that was the logic behind it. And the reason that they wanted to go with that is because of the fact that Area A is so far away. And they felt that the visits would not be a drop-in type or a senior type visit for the programming. It would be for pre-planned for books, and that's probably what it would be. Because the other side is that there's the reading room in Pender, and there's a community school in Pender, and there's a seniors group in Pender, and they support the seniors, the people that are in need of help with computers and the use of computers, and the kids' summer programs, and all the kids' programming comes out of the reading center. And so that was the logic behind that decision at the time.
Okay, thank you. Director Tides?
Yeah, I understand that there's a larger distance to cover for the Pender. On the other hand, the reading room is supported by the Seashell Library, and if you were to use that logic, then a good percentage of probably Pender Harbour's population would not want to contribute to school taxes either, because they don't have anybody going to school in their household. So, as I said earlier, I believe that a library should be paid for or paid into by everyone in the community, because it is one of the bedrocks of our democracy, and whether you're using it or not. And I think to fund libraries by usage is putting a really heavy burden on those people that are actually using it, and that once again makes it something that creates inequality in our community and in our society. So that's my opinion. Of course, I think this formula can be adjusted by just dialing down the percent served by the Seashell Library to work with whatever we come up with. But these are just my thoughts.
Director Pan?
Distance doesn't change. It's a metric that at least we can be consistent about. Measuring who is using the library is actually quite difficult because people may come in and use the library and not use their cards at that time. Just attend or what have you. And with the one-card system particularly, it's actually quite difficult to determine where people really live, whether they've updated their addresses, so on and so forth. So I wouldn't want to go down the path of trying to track, whose citizens are using which library. It gets you into hairy problems. So I would rather. I mean, we effectively recognize that folks on Keats and Gambier can't really use the Gibsons Library a whole lot because it's more difficult because of the physical geography. And, I can see that people in Egmont probably aren't going down to Sechelt a whole bunch. But anyway, that's my thought.
Sure. Do you want to explain that to the audience?
Yes. Down here.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I guess it's one of the things that happened in this room before is when we don't have a clear understanding, we make assumptions. So there's the assumptions that are based in here, and the first one is the residential tax base assumption. What's the focus? I'm not sure. Why not an assessed value? Why a residential?
Director Ties?
That's just the way I understand it. I don't understand the other way of calculating it. If there's a better way of doing it, then maybe and maybe staff or somebody else can weigh in. But yeah, this is just what made sense to me, and that's how I went with it. I'm very open to suggestions.
Director Hills.
So just a little bit more about the assumptions that you have that residential makes sense to you. I don't.
Oh, yeah. Well, what makes sense to me is that since those areas that have a higher commercial tax base, commercial properties are taxed double on their compared to residences, and so in order to relieve some of the residential taxation, I think it's been fairly common practice to weigh a little those with higher commercial tax bases a little bit more, just so that the businesses get a bit more of the load and the residences a little bit less of the load.
Questions, comments? Tina?
I think some of the assumptions have to be verified through staff, because I think that when you have so it really depends on how this apportionment would be used. If we're just contemplating it as part of an MOU, then this could work in the sense where it's really just simply a dollar value apportionment. When you actually go to requisition through the actual services that are currently established through the regional district, to exclude certain classes would be somewhat challenging, or to divvy it up, because each year the assessments change. So the actual requisitioning of these, I don't think there's any precedent in the province of any local governments that have this. The only one that we know in past research is where it's a percentage allocation through a service. Because, of course, we know population assessment mixes, they change each year, or they change throughout a year. So you would have to understand, is this for if it was for an MOU and you assess this on an annual basis or every 5 years, yes, this could potentially work. But then when you actually go to recover it, the theory of having one property class pay more than the other, that would be distorted, because it really depends on what that mix is in the various years. So it's also, in the case of businesses, they pay 2.6%. All of those factors are for a regional district are mandated by the province. So those would be other considerations that you'd want to take into consideration. The other question I had too is some of the numbers here I think are based on the full funding amount, the full revenue. So the 877, I think in 2020 it was 826 what the Seashell Library was requesting for 2020 with an escalator. So those numbers would change just a little bit. So it really depends on how you want to execute this, in what structure, what format.
Okay. So what you're saying is, if we do an MOU, we could fund it two ways. We could use something like this or some other basis as the foundation for the agreement in the first year at a percentage on each year, or we could set it up where each year the calculation is based on a formula which then determines how much is funded each year.
Yeah, both of those would be feasible. Yeah.
Okay. So we need to come up with, first of all, do we want to do an MOU? And that would be, this is a regional district vote at this point, not Seashell or Gibsons. This would be a regional district electoral area directors issue. Director Lee?
I would prefer an MOU rather than, I think that's the right way to do it.
Okay, would you like to make a motion with regards to an MOU? And 4 years, 5 years, what are you looking at setting up?
I believe we had options give to us in May, something like that. Let me have a look and see if I can find those.
I think it was a 4-year at that point, because we were initially looking at a 5-year, and then we were 1 year without, and so there was talk about a 4-year, I believe, is where we're going. Yes. Okay. Director McMahon?
I also favor an MOU. I think we need some stability in the situation, so I wouldn't want to see less than 3 years.
Director Lee?
I actually was thinking of a 5-year again because I hate revisiting this, and I like to see stability.
Thank you. Anybody else? Director Ties and then Director Pratt.
Yeah, I would think a minimum of 4 years so that we boot it off to the next. So I'm in favor of the 5-year, yeah.
Director Pratt.
I'm sorry. I'm in favor of a 5-year for a longer time period, not to necessarily punt it on to somebody else, because we know what happens when that happens. It might be all of us again. But no, I'm in favor of a minimum of a 5-year agreement.
Okay, Director Hilt, do you want to weigh in?
No. Well, no. The 3 seems short. This is the Goldilocks. Little. What's in the middle. So yeah, I'm okay with what's just right.
Director Lee.
I actually had a logic to the 5 years in that it would be in a longer time for the next board to get their feet under them before they have to address something this sticky. And I think it was unfair to us to have to address this so early. But I think we can fix it for the next one.
So would you like to make a recommendation?
The 5-year MOU.
That the SCRD board, the committee recommend to the SCRD board that a 5-year MOU be negotiated with the Sechelt Public Library? Tina?
And Chair, if I may also suggest that, we have to collaborate with the other funding partners, so the Sechelt Nation, SIGD, and the Sechelt Council, because of course everybody has to be in as well as the Library Association, is to make sure everybody is that works for everybody.
Okay, so what else would you like in the recommendation?
And that the motion be forwarded to the Sechelt Indian Government District, the District of Sechelt Council, and the Sechelt Library Board for feedback or approval or something like that.
Okay. You got that, Tara? Okay. Director Lee?
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Perfect. All right. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconder. Any other questions or comments on that piece? Director Hiltz.
I'm just going to clear up some language. Service agreement or MOU.
Okay.
The options from staff before we were talking about continuing the service agreement. So I just need a little clarity about what words we're using.
Okay. Staff?
It's kind of a unique, because it's almost twofold, because the Memorandum of Understanding is an agreement between the local government funders and the funders. We agree that we're going to do it. That's not necessarily legally binding. However, a service agreement would be. So that's why staff are leaning towards more of a service agreement, because the Sechelt Library Association is essentially delivering a service for the community. And so I would suggest we do enter into a service agreement structure.
And one of the appendixes that's added all the time is what services are to be provided. So a service agreement actually works. Follow up, and then we'll go over here to the other side.
And just the motion on the floor is about an MOU, not a service agreement. Is that my understanding of what the motion on the floor is? That's where I was trying to, which one are we voting on? That's
okay. What should it say?
I think I would recommend a service agreement.
Thank you. Director Lee, would you be okay with having that motion changed to have a service agreement?
Yes, the last one I understood was called an MOU funding and service agreement.
Put both in, then it works. Director Pratt?
I'll make that amendment.
Perfect, thank you. Seconded the amendment. Okay, any other comments, questions? So we'll vote on the amendment, that it be referred to as a memorandum of understanding and service agreement. All those in favor? Thank you. So now, yes, Director McMahon?
So I just want to clarify, so that are we looking for one MOU service agreement that all three governments would sign on to, or are we looking for three separate agreements, one from each of the government funders?
My understanding would be that we'd be looking for one that all the funders would sign on, so that there's agreement between all parties who are funding as to what we're funding and what service are being provided. And then perhaps we could have the recommendation read to us.
Thank you, Chair. The Corporate Administrative Services Committee recommended that a 5-year memorandum of understanding / service agreement be negotiated with the Sechelt Public Library Association, and the draft MOU service agreement be forwarded to the Sechelt Indian Government District and the District of Sechelt and the Sechelt Library Board for comment or approval.
I don't think that's quite what we're looking for. It's not that the agreement would be forwarded to them. It's that actually negotiating an agreement be forwarded to them, and that because all the funders would need to be part of that negotiation. So it's not that the agreement gets negotiated here and then goes out to them for approval. We need to make sure everybody's on board before we even negotiate anything. Right? Okay. So maybe we could look at revised. Director Beamish.
Yes, I recognize the town of Gibsons is not part of this process, but I think it's important that in whatever agreement goes forward, that recognize the important role the library plays in the community. That is not just, as is on page 30 of the document here, suggesting that the library shall use funding provided for the purpose of providing library services that includes, but are not limited to, access to books, audiovisual material, and other similar materials, as well as other services normally provided by the library. I don't know what is normally provided by the library at that time, but our libraries have become community hubs. You know, the homeless people in the community use them. They provide an important refuge for people during weather. They provide an important cultural opportunity for new immigrants and new people coming in the community. And I think that we need to expand on the definition and description of services to include those things that have evolved in recent years. I know that our Gibsons Library is very important to us in terms of providing safe, warm space for people. And then from there they migrate to other locations, whether it's in the bushes or hopefully shortly into the cold weather shelter. But I think it's important that we now evolve this from 2008 or 2010 definitions to the definition of 2019 and beyond, because we need to recognize that, acknowledge that in the documents that we provide, so that our community also understands that we're not just looking at the library. You know, I have a hard time calling the library a service because we call our garbage collection a service as well. And it's more than that. It's much more than that, much more important. It's almost an institution in our community that, just like the school board and the local governments are. And we need to be partners with the library and not simply use them as a service provider. My thoughts, anyway.
I was going to comment on that. I totally agree with what you're saying. And in our service agreement, there are some basics that we need to lay out. Like how many hours are we requesting that they provide service? What types of service is a minimum, basically? One of them that has come up for negotiation or has been under discussion in the last while is a youth, I don't know what you call it, youth librarian. And that is written in there, and yet we didn't have one for a number of years because there was no funding for it. And that's one that the Sechelt Nation in particular was wanting to have because of the support it provided to their young people. And they really saw the difference that it made when that service was around. So the library has recognized that and has looked to reinstitute that. It comes at a cost. Director McMahon and then Director Lee.
I'm just looking at process here. Should we set out any timeline on an expectation of when an agreement would be drafted? Because we do need to get this into the budget process.
And we'd probably look to staff for that timeline.
Yeah, as you recall, the September corporate services, the staff brought forward sort of a draft. So I think really the decision that needs to be made, if I may be so bold to say, is really the apportionment. It's how much are the funders willing to contribute, and what that's going to look like for the next term, whether or not it's a hybrid that's been presented, if it's going to be reevaluated each year. I mean, those are the things that I think need to be decided. I think the nuts and bolts of it, everyone was somewhat, there wasn't anything in there from the service delivery or those types of things that we received any indication were a barrier to executing it. It was essentially the funding apportionment. So staff are just awaiting direction. And again, we didn't receive any comments back from the funding partners, so we did send that off, but I don't believe it's gone to any of the Sechelt Indian Government District or the Sechelt Nation Council, or I'm not sure if it's gone to District of Sechelt Council yet.
I don't recall if it's been on our agenda. I know that, we've got a number of councillors here. I've talked to a number of the others. Really, what the feedback I'm getting is we're going to pay the majority anyway. We just want some kind of basis that is consistent across the region, and we'll buck up what the dollars are that we need to buck up. So, we could, once something comes forward with some kind of apportionment, I'm sure we can get it in front of our council pretty quickly. We can stick it on next week or the week after, wherever we need to, and get it moving forward quickly. Director Lee?
I'm still back on the other subject. I noticed that there was a Schedule A description of library services, and I believe that's where Bill's comments would go in the document.
Yes? Okay, Director Beamish?
Yeah, I think that it can be in that section, but I think there should be a preamble in some sense, recognizing the importance of library in the community, and then get into specific services later. But the preamble should acknowledge the changing nature of the role that the library has played in our community and continues to play.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to Tara and see what we have.
Thank you, Chair. Recommended that a 5-year memorandum of understanding / service agreement be negotiated with the Sechelt Public Library Association, and that this recommendation be forwarded to the Sechelt Indian Government District and the District of Sechelt Councils and the Sechelt Library Board for approval to enter negotiations of a Sechelt Public Library MOU / service agreement.
Does that fit what we're looking for, Director Pratt?
I believe it does, and I think what it'll do is it'll provide a lot of stability, which is definitely what I know would be very helpful for the Sechelt Library Board and staff. So having that stability and that length of time would be good.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion that hasn't really been moved or seconded because we revised it. Would someone like to move that recommendation as read by Tara? Moved? Seconded? Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to look at a 5-year funding agreement. Now let's look at the funding apportionment. Okay, so we've had a number of items a number of methods brought forward. We have previously talked about population, assessment, 50-50 split, and then the hybrid that Director Tighe brought forward. Any comments or questions on any of them? Where do you sit? Director Tighe?
First, a question to staff. I believe Ms. Perot said that the library funding through businesses is capped at 2.6%. Did I understand that correctly?
I think she said the multiple is 2.6.
Oh, the multiple. Oh, okay, 2.6. Right.
Yeah, municipalities could be different. I think ours is 2.
Oh, okay, so it's 2.6. Okay.
In the regional district, yes. Director Lee.
I would like to try and explain my illogical behavior here. My thinking about Area A's funding share is based on incomplete data. I don't know how much we actually pay for the same services that you people living near the library are receiving. That's my problem. We need cold shelters. We need support for our homeless. We need support for our seniors. We need programs for our kids. We need programs for our seniors. We have those in Area A, and Area A is paying for them entirely. We do have a book loaning purchasing function up there, so we do purchase books. We do loan them, and that's funded entirely by Area A. We do borrow books, about 20 to 30 a month, from the Seashell Library, and we do have people that go to the Seashell Library and borrow books, and they do it on a destination type trip. It's not a drop-in. It's not a walk over and do it. I believe we could be paying for those services already up there. And so we could easily be paying as much as people in Seashell to get those services. I don't know. I'd sure be willing to, if we aren't paying that much, I'd be willing to buck up my share. But I need some formula to make sure that the functions that Director Tighe so elegantly described was available to the people in Pender, and I'm not paying double. And so because of the lack of data, I feel forced to go with the decision that the previous directors before me have made. And I do note that we have very little say in funding those services. I do note that we went from 630 to 837,000, which was a 24.96% increase last year. I do note that Area A improved their contribution from 29,894 to 40,731, which was a 26.61% increase. So we did more than our share there. And to do that, we went from a 4.86% to a 5% contribution as well. I'm because of no more data and probably not enough time to get it to fully understand the puzzle, I'm prepared to go with the 5% again and go with the people's wishes as to how to fund the library, whether it's whatever we decide, if it's 2%, 3%, 5%, I'll follow that with the same principles as I did before. So anyways, that's my thinking. Whether it's logical or illogical, that's my thinking.
So the only issue I have with that is the foundation upon which you're adding the 2%, 3%, 4%. Right? So then how do we arrive at the beginning number?
The beginning number was arrived previously by the previous directors, and it was based on numbers provided by the Seashell Library on a mix of visitors to the library through the door, and it was then balanced against the number of cards that had been issued, and that was the best data they had at the time, and so that's what was used. I don't know if we can find better data or somewhere better of figuring it out. I would be willing to change my thinking. I just don't have a better basis right now.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Director McMahon?
I just want to say there's two issues here. One is the apportionment between the areas, and the other is increases. And I just don't want to muddle the two. At the moment, we're arguing apportionment between the areas. And if we can find a fairly simple formula, that would be awfully nice.
So question to staff, and it might have to come from the library. Is the province funds the library based on a certain percentage or a certain population in Area A, correct? Whatever that is. How do they determine what that is? Do we know? I mean, in the documentation it said Pender and Egmont, and not the others.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I believe it's the census. However, if there's anything more detailed, I would have to lean to the library.
So 2016 census, and then based on those who reside in Pender and in Egmont and nobody else.
Sorry, thank you. I would have to actually ask the province. That's my understanding, but I could not say for certain that that's how they determine it.
Director Lee.
That was my question earlier, actually. The documentation I read said that local government provided the boundaries, and the government provided the numbers inside those boundaries. But I have never seen the boundaries, but the government provided the figures.
Okay. Okay, first of all, if we go back to page 24 in our package, it indicates that the service bylaw that's been set up, the boundaries are the boundaries of electoral area A, Egmont/Pender Harbor, excluding that part of the Seashell Indian Government District within the geographic boundaries of electoral area A as shown on the map attached. So the service area is all of area A except for, but that's what I'm just saying that's what the service agreement bylaw that was set up indicates. Go ahead.
That's who pays into the fund. The service area is set up, my understanding, the service area is set up to reflect the number of people so the government can decide how much funding they give to the library. So their grant to the library. That's why the service areas are established that way. That's my understanding.
Right, so then let's look at page 3 again. And I pointed this out at the beginning, but let's go back there. Page 3, right at the top. Tina?
It's at the bottom of page 2, Chair. That provides a little bit of context of how the data from
Where
the
the numbers come
census
from.
and whatnot, as well as the top of page 3 there.
Okay, so let's go back to page 2, bottom page 2. So this came from the library branch. The Libraries and Literacy Branch, is that what they call it?
That's what it used to be. So in 2013, this very same question was asked, and so staff wrote a letter to what was then the Libraries and Literacy Branch, which is now the Ministry of Education. And so this is what they answered. So we haven't tested this since that particular time, but as the library director from the Gibsons Library, yes, there's numerous factors that feeds into this, but
Right.
This is essentially the answer we received.
So they say they look at population data from the Canadian Census and then estimation data from BC stats during non-census years. Boundaries for the service areas are determined by the service agreement. So that's Area A, right, except these SIGD lands. In areas where only a portion of an electoral area is served, such as Sunshine Coast Electoral Area A, BC Stats supplies us with population estimates for both the served and unserved portions based on the boundaries supplied. So the next page says supplied to libraries and literacy by local government. Okay, so based on the boundaries supplied, right? The boundary is the service area. The boundary is the service area. BC Stats supplies with population estimates for both the served and unserved portions based on the boundaries supplied to libraries and literacy by local government. And if you go back up, boundaries for service areas are determined by service agreements with local governments. So the service agreement that has been set up, the bylaw that sets up the service agreement, sets up the boundary as Area A.
No.
Staff, clarification?
If it did, the number would be 26, and the number's 15.
Staff, we're talking about service area boundary.
Thank you, Chair. So since 2013, a library service for Area A, if we're just wanting to do an inquiry into just Area A, staff would actually have to verify if the libraries, the province, has amended their allocation based on the service boundaries and the population as depicted in page 26 of the agenda.
Director Lee?
I spent quite a bit of time trying to find out. That's why my very first question was on this subject, because I couldn't find where the boundaries were drawn to make the 15. And I was interested because if it wasn't Madeira, I could have a library. So there's a lot of reasons to know where it is.
So are you looking for staff to get some further information?
Yes.
Okay, what would you like to have clarified?
How the boundaries were drawn and how the numbers were then derived from the boundaries for serving area, library service area.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. There's two parts to that. So there would be the regional district service establishment, so that was clearly defined when we created the service and when we went and petitioned for it. It was specifically defined. I think the question is more from the provincial side of the funding, which is how does the province determine the Area A, so doing a review of what was given to us in 2013 as it relates to the newly created library service in Area A. I don't know if that's what the director is looking for, but I think this is where staff have not done that validation.
So we're looking for what is the service area, so who pays into it, and then what is the served and unserved population that are actually used in the calculation for the funding from the province. Is that correct?
I believe that it's clear who pays into the service. It's everybody. What isn't clear is how the province set the numbers for this library service area that they use to give a grant to the library. Because that's the only use that I can see for those numbers. I don't know if it's true, but that's the only use I can figure out for those numbers. I base this on it because it's actually Area D that at one time had 3 areas drawn, and one wasn't served. And anyways, they once had 3 areas drawn for service areas.
Okay, Director McMahon?
I'm going to say that I don't really care what the province is doing because, number one, we know that they're underfunding us, and number two, they're trying to weasel out of even the funding that they are giving us, and number three, I don't know what their logic is, and I'm not sure that I care. So I would much rather that we come up with a formula that we can agree on that makes some sort of sense, and if that is to say that Area A is covered, but we're going to consider it 50% because of the distance from the library, then that would make some sense. But I don't want to rely on anybody else's logic.
Thank you. Director Lee, over to you.
I agree that knowing the boundaries is not going to factor into my decision. So we don't need it now. Curiosity says I'd like to know, but that's all.
Okay, so where do we want to go with this? Director Tige.
So I'm just summarizing as to what I've learned so far. One is that according to the service agreement, about 63% of Pender Harbour is being serviced by the Sechelt Public Library, according to the funding that the province receives. That being said, Director Lee argues that less people than that are using the library, and therefore there should be less funding for the library coming from Area A than a evenly split per capita calculation on those 63%. And we are trying to find a fair formula that works for everybody across the board. Do I have this right?
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments? A funding apportionment ideas? Director Lee.
I don't think there's less people in Area A that are getting access to books. But it's a combination of the reading room and the Sechelt Library, so I wanted to make that part clear. If the reading room was funded jointly by population, and the other programs, equivalent programs in Area A, were funded jointly, I would have a different view of the matter.
But they're all funded from your function.
Yes. Paid for by Area A. Yes. They're
Right.
not jointly funded.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same in Roberts Creek. Roberts Creek funds their reading room only. Nobody else funds it.
Yes.
Okay. So how does that relate to us coming up with an agreement around a funding formula?
perhaps they would like to have joint funding.
Director Ties.
So what you're saying is that because not everyone in Roberts Creek is going to the Seashell Library because we've got a reading room, let's ignore the Gibsons Library for now. No offense. Then that we should actually be funding less than the 50% that I've put in here right now. I tend to kind of stand above that matter and just say, for the sake of the community, let's just go and ignore the reading rooms in this context, and let's figure something out that works for everyone.
Okay, I actually had Director Pratt, and then we'll have Director Lee respond to that, and then Director Ties.
I know, I think I'm understanding what Director Lee is saying. Due to the relative isolation of Pender Harbor and Egmont from the rest of the coast, and you can actually stay up there. I know this because when I had young children, sometimes it would be months before we would come, venture down coast, because you're very isolated. It is a long distance, relatively speaking. So there's a number of residents that wouldn't necessarily even proportionately not even think of using any services in Sechelt whatsoever, because they have so many of their services up there. They are isolated within that area. It's very unique in that way on the coast. Everything north of Half Moon Bay, really, that's what happens. It's once you're north of Middle Point, you're pretty much self-sufficient, and that's the mindset up there in the community as well. And I think I'm reflecting that from having lived there for a number of years too. That's a very different situation with what you have in Roberts Creek, because essentially they have the choice of 2 libraries as well as a reading center. Yet in Pender Harbor, they don't even think of the Sechelt Library as even being an option. They have a reading center within their area. They have a health center within their area. And due to transportation issues and isolation issues, a lot of people aren't even coming. So I understand where, Director Lee is trying to come up with a formula that makes sense to his community, that is reflective of the community. And it's very different than looking at the Roberts Creek situation. So, and I mean, Half Moon Bay, the majority of our people are, 100% I can say, are going to the Sechelt Library, because that's the next community that we're associated with. Pender Harbor is in a very unique situation here.
Director Lee, and did you want to respond to comment from the gallery?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank Director Pratt. She articulated it quite well, and thank you. Yes, the comments there are, yes, you get a grant from the SCRD, but it's funded by Area A taxpayers. And the rest of your funding is from donations and a grant that was made quite a while ago, and interest on that. And all of the staff are volunteers. The reading room is run pretty thin as far as taxpayers' money. I'd like to acknowledge, though, that we do get internet paid for by the Sechelt Library, and we do get 20 to 30 books a month that are transported up and back down every month. So we do get those services. And there is people in Pender that make very good use of the Seashell Library. They're younger. Most of them are working in the Seashell area or Gibsons on the coast down here, and they drop into that library regular. I've talked to a lot of them. So.
Okay, I'm just going to make a comment. I am a heavy library user, but I very seldom go to the library. Okay, because I do all of it electronic. So that's another. Okay.
Yes, I was going to note. I agree with you. Mm-hmm. My family is heavy readers, but they don't go to libraries. They're technically savvy, and if they will buy books because they like to have the book and they read it again and again. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I had Director Ties and then Director McBann, and then we're going to see if we can pull something together.
I'm not sure if I'm helping anybody here, but I did note that the Roberts Creek Reading Room is funded considerably higher by Area D than the Pender Harbor Reading Room is by Area A. So that was an observation I made, and I went, that's interesting. But I'm going to leave it at that.
Director McMahon?
Okay, I don't know if I can make this motion, but I'm going to try it anyway. On page 36, there is a fixed apportionment based on percentage per area, and I thought I'd just move that fixed apportionment, and then you guys can argue it out. Page 36 of the agenda package.
Are you looking at number 1?
Top of the page, number 1. Yep.
So the issue with this one is that that's based on the initial setup of the MOU, which was based on the grant and aid funding that was put forward at that time. There's no foundation for how the apportionment happened.
It would be a simple way to get this done. That was sort of where I was at. But, the funders, you have to come up with an agreement on that. And, of course, we can't commit the SIGD to anything.
So I have to say I like the one that Director Ties came up with, and with 50% for Area A, which takes into account the fact that not all the population is necessarily served. Director Beamish.
May I have a hall pass, please?
Yes, go ahead. Yep. Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I know. All right, let's call this meeting back to order. Yes. This was a very productive break. Thank you. So it sounds like Okay, how do we do this? I'm going to go back to Director Lee to see if you would like to propose a percentage of population served inside of looking at the funding agreement put forward by the director from Area D.
Yes, if we use 34% of the population, it would come out to a figure that I consider fair, and we can start further negotiations when required on. So I can go with the 34%.
Perfect.
On that
Thank
speed.
you. So the only other funder who is not at the table here and that we'll need to negotiate with will be the Sechelt Indian Government District, or Sechelt, is it the government district, or is Sechelt Indian Government District around funding? So we do not need to talk funding numbers today. We're just looking to get the equation down. So would someone like to make a recommendation based on this spreadsheet we have and indicating that we need to negotiate with the Sechelt Indian Government District? And it has to come from one of the electoral areas. Director Tighes.
I'll make that recommendation, but I'm not even going to try to word it.
Okay, so we're looking at a funding agreement based on population with percent served by the Sechelt Library, ratios varying by area, with Area A at 34%, Area B at 100, District of Sechelt 100, Area D at 50%, with the percentage used for SIGD to be negotiated with them, also taking into account with regards to the commercial base. You'll have to explain that piece.
Yeah, and I don't know if staff might have a better metric to use, because I know I used residential tax base for simplicity's sake, but I know that that the rest of the tax base is not entirely commercial. There's other factors at play there. So maybe we should send that back to staff as to whether they would want, whether they're okay with what I've done, or whether they would want to amend that.
Staff?
Yeah, so I've just done a little bit of quick math, and essentially if the proposed allocations for A, B, District of Sechelt, and Area D are factored in, and if we factored in 100% of the population for SIGD, it would increase their funding share from 2 to 4%. So I think that would be the question that we would have to, it would double their contribution. So I think that is the X factor in this allocation.
I think that's a piece, yes, and we're okay with that piece. The piece that we're not clear how to put into this motion is how do we deal with the last part of this, where we're actually calculating some kind of contribution based on commercial tax base?
I think I would actually exclude that, because essentially that is the method of tax apportionment. So really what you're saying is that the area in its entirety wants to pay X into this particular agreement. How that's apportioned to the area is determined by how that particular tax base. So in Area A, for instance, 91% of their tax base is residential, so 91% will pay that particular share. If it's 42,000, 91% of that will be recovered through the residential, with the other 9%. You can't then say it has to be, you'd have to amend the bylaws, and like I was saying earlier, we don't know of any other regional district bylaw that is that prescriptive in how you apportion it from the tax recovery, from the tax rate side of things.
I don't know how taking that out will impact this spreadsheet.
Considerably.
will it?
Yeah, that bumps me up 2%. It also bumps area A up.
Director Beamish.
Again, it's not an area that we're involved with, but I would have a problem if commercial were to be taxed separately. And the reason being is that in municipal areas, commercial already pays different apportionment in terms of the taxation as well as business license fees. And to rural areas, they don't pay business license fees. They're already getting a break on that. So that I wouldn't want to use that as a model for the town of Gibsons, for example, for the Gibsons Library.
I thought we were close. Tina.
If it would be helpful, I mean, we can, staff can always bring back what some of these options would look like. It would mean that some of these areas would be contributing a little bit more if we're simply taking those percentage of population served, that theory in there. So for instance, we'd have to calculate that. And what we could do is, leave SIGD status quo with, paying 2% and we could play around with it.
Director McMahon?
That seems like a good idea. I mean, it looks like a principle has been established. I also am against trying to factor in the residential tax base because commercial are already paying more. They're paying $2 for every $1 that a resident is paying, so that would be like double taxing them or something. We couldn't do that. So yeah, based on population makes sense.
I'm just not sure, given that we were looking at this spreadsheet, I'm not sure of the impact of that on Area A for percentage-wise as the foundation.
Goes up by 1%.
So we might need to go to 33%, is what you're saying? To have the dollar value?
5% back.
Yes.
Yeah,
33%? Okay. We're going back to 33%.
just bump me up to 11 from the 9.
Well, and this will come back. We have to look at, the things we have to look at yet are the dollar value we're willing to fund. But if we've got an equation as to how that's going to be split up, then we can play with that piece. So we're looking at 33% for Area A, 100 for Area B, 100 for District of Sechelt, 50 for Area D, and SIGD to be negotiated. Director Lee.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the relationship of the spreadsheet to the bylaw. The bylaw collects tax using the traditional method of everybody paying their share, whereas this is just some sort of magic to arrive at a figure. So I was trying to figure out the relationship between the two.
Staff?
How about staff include that as part of a subsequent report?
Perfect. So the motion is that staff come back with a report showing the apportionment based on the percentages we put forward, and you've got the percentages, and how that relates to the service bylaw by area. Anything else we need included in the bylaw or the motion? Director Lee.
Did we agree on the figures that produced here, or what
No,
did we
that's going
agree
to be
on?
part of what we still need to negotiate after, because we haven't determined the dollar value that we're willing to fund. Right now we're looking at the percentage of the apportionment, but not what the final dollar amount will be. Are we going back to the spreadsheet? No? Okay. It's not this anymore anyway.
It's Halloween.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions? First of all, would anybody like to make that motion? Moved? Is there a seconder? Sorry, yeah. Seconder, and we'll have it read. Yeah, make sure you got it.
Sorry, now I need my glasses. Thank you, Chair. That staff report to the next Corporate and Administrative Services Committee with the funding allocation options for the Sechelt Public Library based on percentage of population served using 33% for electoral area A, 100% for electoral area B, 100% for District of Sechelt, and 50% for electoral area D, and how these percentages relate to the service bylaws by area, and that the Sechelt Indian Government District be consulted as to the percentage of population served contribution based on the other area's contributions.
Does that capture what we were looking to have there? We have it moved and seconded. Any other comments or questions? This will be, voting is electoral areas only. All those in favor? Perfect. We have an agreement. Yes. Step one. Yes. Okay, staff, anything further you need on that today? Are you looking for anything on the reading rooms?
No, I believe the reading rooms, they're going to be, the community partners and stakeholders will be presenting their budgets as part of round budget deliberations on December the 4th. So I think unless the committee has anything further they would like to receive from them, then I think we're okay.
Okay, so just as a heads up, though, to the committee, in the amended agenda today, we have budget submissions that have been brought forward. So it'd be a good idea to look those over prior to round one when that information is coming forward. Anything else we need to? We did receive. Oh, okay, not the communications. Oh, these are communications. Okay. Director Hills, yes. And the spreadsheet. Okay, so, yeah, 1 second. So let's have a motion to receive the communications and the spreadsheet. So moved. Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, and? I think at this point it's just to give us a ballpark numbers. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Anything further we need to discuss today? Awesome. I take a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.